undemocratic rules imposed without our say, anxious subjects trembling beneath despotic sway. I call this not dystopia, but tragedy, most Greek. In France, my homeland, that my accent must betray each time I speak, such tales demand rhymes when we declare and when we speak. As Helen once brought ruin dressed in beauty's sacred guise, so Windows comes with marketing that hides monopoly's lies. When your machine arrives with Windows pre-installed at birth, there comes with it a dozen programs of questionable worth. Outlook, Edge, Authenticator on thy screen, yet none are mandatory for your daily work routine. And push by push, warning, pop-up, default set, dark pattern woven into one entangling net. A gentle nudge becomes a guided way until the path becomes the only way. Hi, and welcome to my talk called Farewell Windows 10, Glory to Linux. My name is Marie. I'm an engineer, member of several associations pro-Linux, and though my job is not related to it, I'm often referred as the Linux person in my department. In the university I work, I noticed many computers being thrown away, above all this year, following the end of Windows 10 and the Windows 11 upgrade. So for you, I took the Eurotunnel and came today. I'm also of an antique age and old enough to have befriended Clipit. Thus, a lot of the history I will talk about I have known and witnessed in person. To make my talk as accessible as possible, you can access all my notes on this link, glasgow.uppsala.ai. There you will find as well my sources, references, and link to the slides. I think you may hear this, right? Let's remove them. This talk has asked for a lot of work to develop. You are the first large audience to get a representation of it in English, and I hope it won't be the last. So if you like the concept of antique women hunting tech conferences, feel free to contact me. Today I come before you dressed as women of antiquity. It is as Helen of Troy and later as Antigone that I will speak to you. They come from the time of democracy. We will see that in the Windows and Microsoft world, the feeling of being asked in a democratic way is non-existent. Let's make an exception today. And since example is better than long discourses, let's start by how we will pick the questions. If you have any questions, I recommend you to go to onlinequestions.org and write the code 44444, 5 times the number 4. On this platform, should be written at the on this platform, fully anonymous, you can write your question and or vote for any favorite question so that the most popular and relevant ones are answered at the end of this talk. So even if you are shy and you think your question is not worth it, just ask. Worst case scenario, it will end last and no one will know. The first act, presented by Helen of Troy, will deal with the consequences of Windows 10 reaching end of life. We will begin with the security implications. What happens when a widely deployed operating system stops receiving patches? Then we will look at the changes in user experience. What is being imposed on us with Windows 11? And finally, we will widen the lens, first to the financial cost of Windows for our societies, and then to the broader costs, the costs for us and for the planet. Act 2, presented by Antigone, is about breaking free. We will talk about Linux and why it has matured into a genuine alternative for everyday users and institutions alike. And since I am French, I will not apologize for it. I will instead bring you some French examples, because France has a couple of examples of moving public institutions away from Windows and towards free software. From all small cities to national institutions you might not expect. We will look at what has been done, what worked, and what it took to get here. So, for the security consequences. First, given that we are in a security conference, let's look at the most obvious. What kind of security consequences can end of Windows release have? There has not been major security scandals about Windows 10 yet. The abandonment is too recent. And also, Microsoft keeps silently postponing the end of security updates. Initially planned on October 2026, they postponed the end of security update to October 2027. So the best way to predict what will be the consequences of the end of Windows 10 is to look at the past. In fact, it may take years before the consequences are obvious. An example of major release on which we have a good perspective is Windows XP. For the youngest in the audience, it was a very popular version of Windows that was released in 2001. Microsoft ended support completely in 2014, but in 2017, a vulnerability is revealed called Eternal Blue, and Microsoft sent patch in March 2017 to supported systems. Yet, Eternal Blue was considered the cause of the biggest ransomware attack of all time. On the 12th of May 2017, the ransomware WannaCry spreads, but remember, the Windows XP is not concerned with this patch, as it is not officially supported. This resulted in more than 300,000 computers infected. The attack is so damaging and massive that Microsoft decides to exceptionally submit a patch for Windows XP the day after the attack. That means the 13th of May 2017. The consequences were concrete. For instance, the NHS reported a loss of £92 million with 50 hospitals concerned. Ambulances had to shut down network and use only landline. Data and medical imagery was transferred via DVD, fax, and paper. In conclusion, the end of Windows 10 has not had massive consequences on security level yet. But it is probably because Microsoft is still silently maintaining the security. This year, the patch Tuesday reached more than 500 vulnerability fixes, including 30 days. That is 10 times more than it was in 2015, and then even just 1 year ago. And 300 of those fixes concerned Windows 10. With AI, there is an acceleration in the security patches, but also in the number of attacks being developed and at which speed they are released. So let's not forget that Microsoft, like any big power, is criticized and challenged. And that at the moment, even researchers in security are strongly criticizing Microsoft reward program, which is accused of being opaque and inconsistent in paying and acknowledging security researchers for their work. Microsoft is also censoring security programmers on GitHub. Let's not forget that Microsoft owns GitHub. Some of them even turning hostile to the company. If you want some spicy details about that, I invite you to search for Nightmare Eclipse, a researcher that turned rogue and keeps revealing 0-day vulnerabilities on Wednesdays. We can assume that an attack like WannaCry may happen as soon as Microsoft really stops the Windows 10 support. The problem today, compared to 2014, is that with attacks like this could take far less than 3 years to be released. And our services in hospitals and administrations are even more digitized and dependent on the internet than before. For instance, will we have faxes and DVDs in 2030 in case we need to switch off hospitals' network? So our institutions have no choice but either risking their security compromised or install a new version of Windows. That sounds easy at first, but new version means also new changes on your computer that you never asked for, coming from a supposedly friendly program, and this is where Windows upgrade starts to look suspiciously like a, you say Trojan horse or Trojan horse? Trojan. Very French way of saying it. Like a Trojan horse. The allegorical wooden horse, I mean, and not the malware specifically. Indeed, the advent, let's talk about UX. Indeed, the advent of Windows 11 marks the shoehorn enforcement of a new product by Windows, Copilot. And indeed, Copilot, or the Microsoft's AI, is now present in the user experience. No need to go in the dedicated website to see the Copilot Assistant pop up. Such user experience policy is called forced integration. It is difficult to obtain figures on user satisfaction and their desire to have Copilot integrated into their tools to begin with. Was it really desired by us citizens? Should we accept this as an irreversible march of progress? This is not the first time Microsoft takes arbitrary and even unpopular decisions on behalf of all its users. Let's have a look at this chronology. So, in 1980s, we have the come up of what they call the WIMP, Windows, Icons, Menu, and Pointers. Because yes, that was not natural at the time. At the time, we were just navigating with paths. And some computers were even delivered with games to learn how to use your pointer and your mouse. In 1995, Windows introduced its famous Start menu. This is an ergonomy decision that they will come back on later on, because as we see, in 2012, it was the end of Start menu, and this nightmare for some of us called Windows 8. I see there's still PTSD out of the room. In 2010 is the advent of Office 365, which means the cloud enforcement. Microsoft starts to send all your Word documents into the cloud. And the subscription model enforcement. You start to pay an abonnement, because before, people would buy Office on a CD-ROM with a license key. It costed between 200 and 500 pounds, but at least you owned it for life. In 2015, the Start menu is back with the advent of Windows 10, and also it was announced that Windows 10 will be the last Windows. In 2023, Windows 11 starts to be introduced with Copilot, so this is the start of Copilot integration, and 2025, Windows 11 is enforced for good with Copilot, and it is the end of Windows 10 announced. So the question is, what's next? In conclusion, AI, Windows Copilot, icons, start buttons, etc., are not an evolution towards a single, legitimate, and unavoidable progress, as it is sometimes sold. They are political decisions, often arbitrary and sometimes reverted back and forth. And the fact that such a dominant company imposes it on billions of people is, in fact, a violation of democratic principles on a global scale. So much for the first consequence. But there is even more concrete consequences of the end of Windows 10. Money loss, because Windows isn't free. First, individually, we pay for a license. Prices vary greatly from a few pounds for basic versions to several £100, depending on the license and subscriptions included. Most of the time, Windows is pre-installed, and you are forced to buy the license with the machine, even if you don't see it. Europe has even ruled that manufacturers are obliged to refund this cost if Windows is not used. Associations are trying to act on this pressure point, like the FSFE, or Free Software Foundation in Europe. It is not uncommon to get back 30 or 50 pounds on your laptop, but spoiler alert, every manufacturer has its own refund procedure, which makes it tedious for consumers to get back their money. So that is for the direct individual cost. But this cost is double, and you may be paying more to Microsoft in your taxes than in your personal IT expenses, or institutions, or administrations, or schools are using it. There is therefore a collective cost. The fact that British institutions use Microsoft is public money going directly into the wallet of American companies that pay very little taxes to us. So this money leaks out of our economy. An update like the one of from Windows 10 to Windows 11 costs our institution. We need to pay for extra work hours, for new machines. And the interesting information now is how much? To give you an idea, I will talk about two examples where we have some figures. In 2025, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, the DFRA, in your country, United Kingdom, published a report misleadingly claiming that they updated most of their workstations from Windows 7 to Windows 10, while Windows 10 was about to be retired by Microsoft a couple of months later. This caused a scandal in newspapers and the release of some embarrassing figures. The total upgrade had a cost of £312 million, including, among other things, the outright replacement of more than 31,000 machines that were too old for newer Windows. Beyond the PR scandal, later on nuanced by DFRA claiming afterward that actually most machines were upgraded to Windows 11, all this gives an idea of the financial cost that Windows' forced upgrade represents for just one ministry. A second example now. In 2008, the French police forces, faced with the end of Windows XP, decided to gradually switch to another system called Ubuntu. Results? An estimated annual saving of minimum €7 million, about £6 million, including £2 million just in Windows licenses, on a fleet of about 70,000 workstations. There is even some talk even about €500 million in cumulative savings over 20 years. This last example reminds us that Windows end-of-life events have consequences that are not new and amount to millions of pounds every year just at the scale of a single ministry. And we have seen that Microsoft broke its promise to have Windows 10 as its last Windows version, which is one of the mercurial behaviors that make those costs hard to anticipate. Financial anticipation at the scale of companies and institutions is critical. For some people, the extended security updates, or ESU, for Windows 10 is free, but you need to play Simon Says. Either you sync your PC with Microsoft Clouds, or you have 1,000 fidelity program points. For other clients, like business administrations, it is not free. Typically, ESU is minimum $30 per license and doubles every year. Now that we have an idea of the order of magnitude that Microsoft cost to our institutions beyond the obvious financial loss, we must talk about the more tragic consequences. If the arbitrary decisions of Microsoft were just costing money, I would be presenting a comedy, not a tragedy. For information, Windows is a historical monopoly. In the 90s and up to 2009, over 90% of desktops ran on Windows. And today, Windows still accounts for more than 60% of desktops worldwide. Microsoft is therefore still in a dominant position, which it abuses. See the antitrust trial browser that costed 530 million euros in 2013. And this is not without consequences. Okay. In 2025, Dell made an estimate that 500 million of PCs in the world cannot be upgraded to Windows 11, just because of hardware compliance, not to mention peripherals. Going back to our examples, or the example about NHS, why they could not maintain security, one of the reasons they invoked in an article was that not because of the computers themselves, but because of some peripherals like medical scanners that were not running on newer version of Windows. So expensive medical equipment may require to stay on an older version, and if you throw away a scanner that's worth £5 million, you think twice before upgrading the computer. A laptop throughout its life, from production to destruction, cost 250 kilograms of CO2. Roughly speaking, that's the equivalent of one single business class flight from Paris to London, and a lot of additional pollution from the required mineral extraction. In the late 80s and early 90s, the average lifespan of a computer was 11 years. In 2015, it dropped to 6 years. Today, in 2026, a study estimated the average lifespan of a corporate laptop to 3.7 years and of a desktop to 4.6 years. As you can hear, this is shrinking. We throw away hardware more and, above all, faster. But most of the time, it's not because of the hardware itself, but because of the software, that the software has become too slow. Windows is full of what we call bloatware, which unnecessarily bogs down the machine and requires at least 40 times more hard drive capacity, RAM, and processing power today than it did 20 years ago. And I put you a table extracted from Wikipedia where you have the machine requirements for every Windows from 95 to Windows 11. And you will do the math, but it's minimum 40 times more on every aspect. Except that most of what people do with the computer today isn't very different from what they did with the Windows XP or 2000 computer. Chatting on a network, making a Skype call, making presentation. We did that perfectly 20 years ago in 2006. There is therefore forced obsolescence, and most of our computers are not thrown away for hardware reasons. Whatever anyone says, they are not really recyclable. So we can conclude that Microsoft causes an absurd and avoidable ecological disaster. Windows is accused of eroding our privacy. We are talking about spyware, specifically Windows automatically sending usage reports of your software to Microsoft. Booting Windows 11 is nearly impossible without registering a Microsoft account and send in your info online. Privacy options are hard to find and often disabled by default. And finally, you are subjected to targeted ads directly within your operating system. Beyond that, Windows is a black box, and it's difficult to know and guarantee your privacy. The code is not open source. You have to trust a corporation. It costs our sovereignty. Microsoft is not British. It obeys to American laws, which has, among others, the Cloud Act, which weakens the privacy of our data from American government, regardless if they are or not stored outside of the US. The day this country becomes hostile to us, our infrastructure is at their mercy. An argument that is rarely put as such, but Windows goes further and further into intrusiveness and dumbing us down through our machines. It's really not normal that right in the start menu, we can find ads about Netflix, Candy Crush, Disney Plus, or TikTok. That didn't exist in 2000s. We had ads for Norton's Outlook and corporate-related stuff mostly. Not for gaming distraction, and at least not at this level. Imagine any other professional tool, like the scalpel of a surgeon or the hammer in your plumber's toolbox, telling you to randomly play casino. In Microsoft's world, this is perfectly normal. Finally, there is the erosion of our boundaries. With Windows, we see our boundaries constantly attacked to the point that it tends to normalize what we accept from computers, which is just not acceptable. Unprompted updates with forced restarts in the middle of our work, harassment to push you to use default Windows software. And I really like this tweet on Mastodon that was a poll saying, do you think Microsoft understands consent? 0% says yes, 100% says, remind me in 3 days. And that leads to Act 2 of our tragedy. We carry every myth within us, universal and true. A Helen of Troy in humble nerds like you. There is a grace in standing firm against the crown. A beauty for which we fight when all hopes seem down. But Helen is not the character we need tonight. The truest hero here is Antigone's fight. She sought to give her fallen brother dignity, to honor his dead flesh against authority. To honor his dead flesh against authority. Let us give our fallen machine their due respect. Refuse that foreign hands should treat them with neglect. You got it. In Act 2, forget Castor and Pollux. Back to modern time. It's about Linux. But which distribution is right for you? A Debian, a Fedora, an Ubuntu? Or a wee, slicket, Corinne, timorous BSD? Oh, what a panic in thy PC. To migrate or not to migrate, that is not the question. The question, friends, is how to make this transition. So, we have seen previously that one of the main reasons why we and our administrations are forced to upgrade is not to get more fashionable UX design, but to keep the safety to date. And unfortunately, this imperative forces people to move systems when they do not want, or when they cannot afford new machine for that. Many of you probably already know Linux. It's a kernel, or loosely speaking, it's a family of operating systems based on a different economic model and philosophy than Microsoft. Linux systems mostly do not belong to a single company and can always be taken over and modified by us. So the advantages. A 10-year-old machine can be revived in a fully secure and up-to-date Linux distribution. By the way, this discourse is given on the machine that has been collected in a dustbin that was running on Microsoft before. Now it's on Linux. But as anyone who has tried to convince others to use Linux will know, all this is easier said than done. I will list here some arguments you can use. They are not limited to this slide. You do not need to pay a license, which means you are less vulnerable to mercurial changes in licensing policy. It is considered generally more stable. Goodbye the blue screen of the death. And ultimately, you don't have to leave Windows. An external hard drive with a full installed Linux system that you plug on the boot can work, a dual boot, a virtual machine, maybe a server online. Depending on the situation, any Linux expert should be able to think of a fallback solution when dependencies remain. I'll talk another important stuff as individual and as the IT experts we are, is to know the good entry points and distros to recommend. As a hack community, you typically might already be on Kali Linux, which is a distribution specialized in pen testing and in digital forensic. But if your best friend or your accountant wants to be on a Linux machine, please be a gentle human being and point them to one of the many beginners-friendly distributions, such as Ubuntu, Linux Mint, which I recommend not only because they are very mainstream and user-friendly, but also because their installation procedure is relatively easy and well explained and tested. Finally, Zorin OS. This one I have not tested myself, but it is gaining in popularity in the last year because of it owns the fact to look as similar as possible to modern Windows, which for some Windows users and administrations can save a bit of training time. Okay. Let's head now to Ekerol, a city of 40,000 inhabitants, where you, Scottish people, are going to buy your next secondary house. Not for skiing in French Alps, but for avoiding that your local taxes go to Microsoft's pocket. Indeed. Ekerol is a medium-sized city that managed this performance. In 3 years, its entire administration and IT switched from Windows to Linux. There is a wonderful talk by Nicolas Vivant in the so-called Journée du logiciel libre in Lyon 2026 that explains the strategies that Hack roles put in place. The talk is in French, but I put in reference the transcription that can be easily translated in your language. For now, I will summarize here a lot of the common sense and his experience that I myself have been able to observe in the field. First, observe that in the case of Hack role, the impulse for leaving Microsoft came from above. The politicians wanted their IT system to reflect their politics in general. 2. If you want people to move away from Windows and big tech in general, start by providing what is not provided by Windows. Notice that we just did that. I put you on onlinequestions.org, which is a small piece of open source software whose functionality is not yet monopolized by a big tech. This way, you gain trust and prove that non-corporate owned software can be functional. 3, Microsoft and Windows are a software dependency that goes beyond the operating system. Outlook, Word, Excel, etc. You first have to leave as much Microsoft software as possible before leaving the OS. Leaving the OS itself is the final boss. For certain professional roles or certain people will not be able to switch to Linux. The Illustrator graphic designers, maybe you hackers specialize in Windows vulnerabilities, and that's okay. Start with the easiest ones and the users and departments that will cause the least friction for adoption. Always respect the values and needs of the users. Being on open source just for open source sake makes no sense, because the computer is a tool. The Hack role City Hall is there to produce passports. You have to keep the user's need in mind. Deploy, adapt, show the maximum number of features that allow efficiency in their work. 6, you have to beta test distributions with motivated users and prove that it works and to gain trust. Only then implement it across the board. A thing that they did was testing a lot of different OS, Mint, Ubuntu, Fedora, etc., for 3 months with a sample of pioneer employees and discussed together what was the best option for them at the time. They ended up taking Zorin OS. An interesting anecdote Nicolas Vivant tells is that it looked so much like Windows that one of their employees asked to have a Linux computer after her computer was already migrated to Linux. 7, plan a fallback solution. For example, an available workstation or a server for cases where Windows is unavoidable before any migration. Typically, your accountant may need to use Excel, which has non-compatible macros. And in this case, a version of Windows usable on a server may be a solution. Finally, always track the cost it saved to use open source compared to the proprietary software like Microsoft. Because the use of alternative software is not the norm, Microsoft using aggressive commercial strategies, the use of open source will be questioned. 9, take into account the humans behind. Changing IT policy is changing people habits. It can provoke tension and management issues that you need to be aware of and anticipate. An example is the inversion of the hierarchy between Windows experts versus Linux experts in the IT departments. Another example is the feeling of being downgraded if you start to give and convert only old computers with Linux. That participates to send the message that Linux is for citizens of second zones, when it is not. Know, for instance, that French police, when they wanted to encourage Linux conversion, offered a bigger screen to any employee making the move to Linux. There are many other pieces of advice that I will not develop here, because this could be another talk. But you have the references in my notes, which are glasgow.uppsala.ai. We asked the question, conclusion. We asked the question about the consequences of the end of Windows 10. We navigated the history and background of a company policy over 40 years of existence. There is an alternative operating system called Linux. It works on all PCs, and it's a family of systems with versions for different user profiles, beginners, advanced programmers, hackers, etc. There are plenty of reasons why you might want to leave Windows and switch to Linux. Political, economical, ecological, security, privacy, sovereignty. These reasons belong to you. On an individual scale, we can brave the injunction to throw our computers in the trash. It's not impossible. There are pitfalls to avoid, and you have to take it step by step. Those pitfalls are both material and human, but the efforts are rewarded. Saving, regaining control, values, and consistency. My last advice is to document yourself well and get as close as possible to communities that already use Linux so you don't isolate yourself in your practice. Finally, one last piece of advice. On the collective scale, it's more complicated. Decisions must come from decision makers. With a strategy, because converting an IT fleet requires resources, time, and investment, especially at the beginning. The gendarmerie and ECHE role were political decisions with strong incentives put in place. And at the end, they gained sovereignty and predictability over the cost of their IT. I will now take the questions. So, do we have questions?
Yeah.
We do?
You have a long list of questions. We'll see how many we get through.
Okay, can you...
So I'm the advanced text-to-speech system.
Can you make sure we have the questions on the, screen? I hope to be able to answer at least the two first questions and the two most popular. And thank you for using it to have demonstrated that we can together use a simple software. So ask me.
Okay, so the most popular question is, do you think Microsoft is trying to push a model for the OS similar to what you mentioned for Office, where it's an always online subscription model for the operating system itself?
Don't tell them bad ideas.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're wet dreams. But so if I understood the question, it would be about making the whole OS some kind of subscription thing. I mean, that could be their dreams. That being said, I'm wondering if they are scared of doing it because the other OS, like Chrome OS and so on, are not, and that it's not yet in the habits of people. So I think that could be their desire, but I don't think it's their strategy right now. But sending you as much other softwares, that's, yeah.
I guess you also already mentioned Copilot being there all the time, which is also related. Okay, we have actually another question has overtaken it in popularity now.
Okay.
Is Windows best described as malware or as ransomware?
Now, with the subscription mode, I call it ransomware. But I think before, I would have called it more malware. Like in the 90s, it was more of a malware thing. I'm trying to see if it's just a rhetorical question or if there is something clever to say about that. Going to the next question, and maybe I will come back to it.
Okay. So here's someone who says that they are working at a company and his colleagues are very worried about what they would call open source risk, meaning the effort required to vet vulnerabilities, deal with licensing. They might lose enterprise support that they would other have. They might be leaking intellectual property. So do you have any suggestions for how to shift that attitude within the company?
Deal with licensing. And it's hard, you may not be able to convince your company if you're depending where you are, but I think it's important to remind that when you are a company and you do open source, what you are selling is not the code per se. You are selling the support around it. You may be selling a subscription to adapt the code towards a special need. So, yeah, and I think this is a question that comes back on open source discussions. So there are models, definitely, and it depends if the company is able to switch to those models. It is a whole debate about open source in general. I think an argument I really like is also to say that if you do open source, there is a lot of very good programmers that like this idea of open source, and you can recruit better talents as well, because it's something, there are computer nerds that are into that, and that can be a selling point if you have hard time recruiting, getting known, things like this. I hope this answers partly the question.
I think also the next question overlaps a bit with it. So ignoring sort of possibly transitioning to Mac OS or Google Chrome OS, what might be some other options for larger organizations, or at least medium-sized organizations, to transition where they can still maintain the type of enterprise support that they might need?
Good question. I'm very scared of saying something stupid because I'm working for a university, and I know that at some point they were installing Ubuntu, though now they refuse. But wasn't there Red Hat and so on, like all the Ubuntu related company that does that? Yes. I don't know by heart. I don't want to say something weird because, yeah, it might be a matter also of contacting companies developing the softwares like Ubuntu, the OS like Ubuntu or Zorin or whatever, and talking about the issues you have and what kind of support they can give. And am I precise? Your questions, your intellectual work that you have done here of making the question, making a hierarchy before ranking the questions and so on, I will try to reuse to improve next conferences. So if I don't answer your question properly, maybe next time you will have the answer. And I partially volunteer for a radio in France where there is a panel of experts talking, and I come with your questions and ask them. So if you speak French, look for lecodegnou.org, and you will have answers to your question given by a panel of specialists. Continue.
So I think we have time for one or two more. So with the French government already making a move to Ubuntu, so I guess this refers to the Ubuntu, the Gendarmerie, and Ekirol. Do you think Linux's role is going to become bigger in the corporate world as well over the next few years?
I thought the question would go towards, will the French government and other governments do it? Companies. I think it's a whole ecosystem. Like one of the reasons why companies are not using Ubuntu and so on is because we are not trained. At school, we are not with it. It's not natural, but if there is an example from a government and so on, then they would be less scared. At least I hope so. I think also what we need is a good scandal. Scandals like the ones that happened with Donald Trump doing crazy things with Greenland and so on, made more and more people aware of the problem of sovereignty and so on. So that also may alarm companies that are scared of hostility from an American provider. Continue? Should we?
Yeah, I still have 1 or 2, I think, time.
Okay.
So here's someone who's, from our perspective, I guess, very optimistic. Do you think there's any chance for Microsoft to restore consumer trust and avoid a mass migration to Linux? Or is it inevitable?
If they could, first, it would have been good if they didn't break their promise of, or what they said about Windows 10 being the last Windows. I mean, I'm wondering if they had not said that, would have everybody moved to Windows 10, and would have Windows 10 been so popular? So is there a chance to redo trust? Well, they could change politics. We had that a little bit with Mac, who at some point decided to make only soaps. You know, there was nothing to plug there was only USB 3 and no HDMI and so on. And suddenly they came back on their decisions. So yeah, I think I have a sign stop here. So yeah, that's good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.